They thought working beside you would keep everything under control. Deadlines gave them an excuse to watch you. Meetings gave them a reason to hear your voice. Shared responsibilities let them stay close without admitting your presence had begun affecting them. Then, someone else entered the room. Suddenly, the professional mask stopped feeling safe. Welcome back, beautiful soul. We are not using tarot to declare anyone's future. We are using it as a psychological mirror for the tension, fear, and hidden desire inside this connection. The first image opening the story is the Queen of Swords reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe sharp perception distorted by emotion. A person who normally reads situations quickly may begin misinterpreting details when jealousy enters. They still appear intelligent, controlled, and observant. But beneath that composure, their thoughts are becoming defensive. This person believed the arrangement between you was manageable because everything had a label: work, collaboration, study, a project, a practical reason to communicate. Labels protected them. They could remember your schedule and call it preparation. Notice your mood and call it awareness. Stay after everyone left and call it responsibility. They could offer advice, correct a detail, or find another reason to sit near you while convincing themselves none of it meant anything personal. But the Queen of Swords reversed suggests their objectivity had disappeared. They noticed when you entered. They noticed who made you smile. They noticed when your attention moved away. Perhaps, for a while, they believed you were equally contained, calm, focused, careful not to blur the line. That assumption gave them confidence, until one ordinary moment exposed the truth. Someone else spoke to you with an ease they had never allowed themselves. Maybe this person used your name warmly, moved a chair closer, praised your work, or made you laugh during a conversation. You relaxed. That was what unsettled them. In that instant, they understood the shared environment did not belong to them. Access was not intimacy, proximity was not a claim, and the next card will reveal what they replayed after seeing someone else receive your attention. The image here is the Eight of Pentacles reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe concentration disrupted by emotional interference. Someone may continue performing the same tasks, answering the same questions, and following the same routine, but internally, their attention is no longer where it should be. They replayed the expression on your face, not because it was dramatic, because it was natural. They remembered the warmth in your voice when you answered, the slight change in your posture, the way your shoulders seemed to loosen when the conversation moved beyond obligation. Perhaps you laughed without checking who was listening. Perhaps you allowed the moment to continue when you could have returned to the task. Nothing inappropriate happened. That almost made it worse. The Eight of Pentacles reversed suggests they could no longer focus on the work without connecting it to what they had witnessed. A detail was missed. A sentence had to be reread. A simple task took longer because their mind kept returning to the same question. Why did you seem so comfortable with them? This person had worked carefully for every piece of closeness they received from you. They learned when to approach, how long to stay, which subjects made you open, and which ones made you retreat. They treated connection like something that required patience, precision, and constant restraint. Then someone else appeared and reached you without following any of those private rules. That difference disturbed them. They may have remembered the exact sound of your laugh, noticed that you turned your body toward the other person instead of keeping yourself angled toward the room, recalled how quickly you responded, or how the conversation continued after its practical purpose had ended. To anyone else, these details might have meant nothing. To them, they became evidence. The reversed energy of this card can also reflect frustration with effort that produces no visible reward. They had invested attention without admitting it was an investment, stayed consistent without asking what that consistency was building toward. Now they were watching someone else receive something they believed they had quietly earned, but they could not object. They had never claimed to want more. So instead of confronting the feeling, they began studying the other person. How often they approached you, how confidently they used your name, how closely they watched your reactions. And slowly, the jealous person began to realize that the attention directed toward you may not have been casual at all. The image here is the Seven of Swords. Psychologically, this card can describe intention hidden beneath ordinary behavior. Someone may appear casual while carefully choosing when to approach, what to reveal, and how much attention to give without making their interest obvious. The jealous person recognized this pattern immediately because they had been using it too. They noticed how the other person remembered something you mentioned, Kosisar, days earlier, how a practical question became a longer conversation, how praise moved beyond your work and began reflecting something personal about you. Your humor, your perspective, the way you handled pressure, small observations that required attention. Perhaps this person found reasons to remain after the conversation should have ended, sat closer when another seat was available, looked toward you before reacting to something as though your response mattered more than anyone else's. None of these actions proved anything by themselves, but together they created a pattern. The Seven of Swords can reflect indirect pursuit, not necessarily dishonesty, but strategy. Someone testing the environment before revealing what they truly want, creating private moments inside public spaces, allowing interest to remain deniable until they understand whether it will be welcomed. The jealous person saw that strategy because it resembled their own. They studied the timing, the eye contact, the physical distance. They noticed whether the other person approached when you were alone or became more animated when you entered. They watched for the slight pause before your name was spoken, the unnecessary question, the conversation that continued after the answer had already been given. Jealousy may have sharpened their perception. It may also have encouraged exaggeration. A friendly gesture can become suspicious when someone already fears losing access. A normal exchange can appear intimate when they are searching for evidence. But one detail remained difficult to dismiss. The other person watched your reaction, not the room, not the group, you. And when you responded warmly, they seemed encouraged. That created a silent awareness between them and the jealous person. Nothing was said directly. No boundary was openly crossed. Yet each person may have begun recognizing the other as someone with a private interest beneath the practical surface. The dynamic had changed. Still, the rival's intention was not what frightened this person most. Someone else wanting you could be dismissed as competition. What they could not dismiss was the possibility that you had noticed the attention and were beginning to welcome it. The image here is judgment reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe uncertainty about what one is seeing because the answer carries consequences. A person may notice enough to feel alarmed, then question their own perception because accepting it would force them to confront what they have avoided. They began examining your response, not only what you said, how you said it. Perhaps your voice became warmer when the other person approached. Perhaps you looked up more quickly when they entered. A conversation that began with work continued after the practical subject had already ended. You did not rush away. You did not close the moment. And the jealous person noticed. Still, nothing was clear enough to confront. You may simply have been comfortable, friendly, open to conversation. The warmth they observed may have carried no romantic intention at all. But ambiguity gave their mind room to move. Judgment reversed can reflect the refusal to accept an uncomfortable realization. This person wanted to believe your attention was predictable because the environment was predictable. They knew where you would be, when you would speak, what responsibilities would bring you together. They mistook routine for emotional security. Now your behavior reminded them that you existed beyond the role they knew. You had private conversations they did not hear, preferences they had never asked about, relationships formed outside their view. You could become interested in someone without requesting permission from the structure surrounding you. That was the deeper threat. Not competition. Choice. They had been studying whether the other person was worthy of your attention, but slowly they understood that worthiness was not theirs to decide. You could enjoy someone's company simply because you wanted to. You could respond warmly without explaining what it meant. You remained emotionally independent, and therefore impossible to fully predict. The labels that once calmed this person began feeling useless. Coworker did not explain the way they watched you. Collaboration did not explain why your laughter with someone else stayed in their mind. Professionalism did not remove the fear that another connection could develop while they remained silent, so they continued pretending, answered normally, focused on the task, kept their expression controlled. But uncertainty had already entered their behavior. They became more attentive when the other person approached, more careful with their tone, more aware of where you looked, and perhaps without realizing it, they began treating you differently. Perhaps the change was small at first, a colder answer, a correction that did not need to be made, a sudden formality where warmth had existed before. They may have addressed you differently when the other person was nearby, kept the conversation strictly practical, focused on a minor mistake because discussing the task felt safer than acknowledging the emotion beneath it. Or they moved in the opposite direction. They became more helpful, more available, more determined to prove that they understood what you needed before anyone else could offer it. They might have answered a question you directed toward the group, found a reason to remain beside you, interrupted an easy conversation with information that could have waited. Everything still appeared professional. But the timing revealed something. Their attention was no longer only on you. It was also on the distance between you and the other person. Who reached you first? Who made you laugh? Who received the longer answer? A silent comparison had begun. Perhaps the other person sensed it. Not because anything was spoken directly, but because tension changes the rhythm of a room. One person moves closer, the other becomes quieter. One offers assistance. The other suddenly remembers something important to tell you. Competence became a form of positioning. Proximity became communication. Still, beautiful soul, their jealousy is not your responsibility to manage. You are not required to become colder, smaller, or less responsive simply because someone chose silence and now feels threatened by your freedom. That distinction matters. Because the harder this person tried to appear unaffected, the more their behavior may have exposed them. Withdrawal became a test to see whether you would notice. Criticism became a way to regain control. Helpfulness became an excuse to restore closeness. They wanted reassurance without asking for it. And when you continued behaving naturally, they could not tell whether you had noticed the change or simply refused to participate in it. That uncertainty hurt. But the deeper wound was not only the presence of another person, it was recognition. The rival seemed willing to do what they had repeatedly avoided: speak warmly, show interest, risk being understood. So perhaps this person was not only jealous of who else wanted you. They were jealous of the emotionally courageous version of themselves they had never allowed you to meet. The image here is death reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe resistance to a change that has already become necessary. Someone knows an old pattern is no longer working, yet continues repeating it because transformation would require vulnerability. This person had become attached to waiting. They waited for a better moment to compliment you, reduced admiration to feedback, told you that you handled something well when what they wanted to say was that they admired the way your mind worked. They waited to invite you somewhere. Perhaps they imagined asking after the project ended, after the deadline passed, after the environment felt less complicated. Later became their protection. Concern was disguised as advice. Tenderness became teasing. A message was written, reread, and deleted because one sentence sounded too personal. Warmth appeared briefly, then disappeared the moment they feared you might recognize it. They edited themselves around you. Again and again. Death reversed can reflect the emotional cost of refusing to let one form of connection become another. This person may have believed that keeping everything unchanged would preserve their access to you. No confession meant no rejection. No risk meant no loss. But it also meant no movement. Then the other person arrived and behaved without carrying the same history of hesitation. They offered the compliment, continued the conversation, allowed their interest to become visible without first demanding certainty. That openness became a mirror, not because the rival was necessarily better, because they were willing. The jealous person began remembering every moment when they could have shown you more and chose safety instead. Every time you gave them an opening and they responded carefully. Every invitation hidden inside a casual suggestion that they never completed. They assumed there would always be another opportunity, another meeting, another shared responsibility, another reason to remain close, but proximity was never permanent. The project could end, schedules could change, someone could leave. Your attention could move toward a person willing to meet you outside the structure that kept this connection contained. Regret entered where confidence had been. Still, Regret does not excuse coldness, control, or silent resentment. Their hesitation was their choice. Your freedom remains yours. And perhaps all of this would have stayed hidden inside them if they had not discovered one small detail: a plan, a message, a possibility involving you and the other person. Something that made waiting feel dangerous for the first time. The image here is the moon reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe uncertainty becoming harder to maintain once a hidden detail reaches the surface. Something that was previously imagined now feels possible enough to demand attention. Perhaps they overheard the other person inviting you somewhere after work. Perhaps they noticed that personal contact information had been exchanged. A conversation moved from the shared platform to a private message. A future plan was mentioned with enough familiarity to suggest that communication had continued beyond what they could see, or the detail involved time. Your schedule might be changing. The project could be ending. One of you may be moving into another role, another department, or another environment entirely. Nothing had been confirmed, but the possibility was enough. The moon reversed can reflect the moment when fear stops remaining abstract. This person had always known the arrangement would not last forever. They simply avoided thinking about what would happen when the practical reason for closeness disappeared. Now there was a date, a plan, a visible direction, and suddenly everything they postponed began returning at once. The compliment they never gave, the invitation they never completed, the personal question they wanted to ask but replaced with something safer. They began calculating how much time remained, how many meetings were left, whether another opportunity would appear before the other person created one first. Their thoughts accelerated. Yet urgency did not remove fear. Acting now could expose the truth behind every careful interaction. You might reinterpret their attention, their availability, the way they always seemed to notice when you needed something. What they had presented as professionalism could begin looking personal. Because it was. Still, doing nothing carried a different risk. The connection could change while they remained protected by silence. You could begin meeting the other person outside the environment where the jealous person had learned how to stay close. They could no longer assume tomorrow would resemble today. And this is where the internal conflict sharpened. They wanted to interrupt the movement without appearing possessive. Ask what was happening without revealing why the answer mattered. Create another reason to see you while pretending the timing was accidental. But the old strategy was failing. The label could protect their image. It could not protect their opportunity. So now they faced a private choice. Continue hiding behind work, collaboration, and routine, or do something that would change how you understood every moment that came before it. The image here is the hermit. Psychologically, this card can describe retreat used to create emotional safety. Someone steps back not because the feeling has disappeared, but because distance seems easier than discovering whether it is shared. One impulse told them to speak. Ask something personal. Suggest meeting outside the usual environment. Allow one honest sentence to remain unedited. Another impulse told them to compete, become more useful, more impressive, more present than the other person. Remind you, without saying it directly, that they understood your habits, your standards, and the pressure you carried. Then fear offered a third option. Disappear first. They may have watched you closely one day and become unusually distant the next. Held your attention during a conversation, then ended it abruptly when the moment began feeling personal. Perhaps they asked whether you had plans, only to disguise the question with a practical reason. They wanted information, without revealing why they needed it. The hermit can reflect genuine self-examination, but it can also describe someone retreating so deeply into analysis that no real connection can reach them. They examine every possibility, every word, every risk. And while they are thinking, the situation continues moving. Perhaps they became cold after seeing you with the other person. Not openly rude, just controlled enough for you to feel the difference. Or perhaps they offered to help with something that would create time alone together, presenting it as efficiency rather than desire. Their behavior contradicted itself because their motives were divided. Come closer, prove your value, protect yourself. But their deepest fear may not have been rejection. Rejection would hurt, but it would provide an answer. What frightened them more was discovering that the connection they had privately given so much meaning to had remained ordinary for you. That the moments they replayed were moments you barely remembered, that their careful attention had never communicated what they believed it communicated. Beautiful soul, you are not responsible for translating silence into honesty. You do not have to pursue someone because they withdrew, reassure them because they became jealous, or solve the emotional conflict they refused to name. Still, pressure changes people. And eventually, one controlled moment became less controlled. Perhaps they looked toward the other person, then back at you, and asked too casually, "So, are you two seeing each other outside of here?" The image here is the Page of Wands. Psychologically, this card can describe an impulse becoming visible before someone has prepared the perfect delivery. Curiosity moves faster than caution. A question escapes, carrying more emotion than the speaker intended. Perhaps the room became quiet for 1 second. They tried to make the question sound ordinary, relevant, almost playful, but their tone revealed investment. Why had they noticed? Why did it matter whether you met this person outside the shared environment? The moment the words left their mouth, they may have attempted to regain control, looked away. Added a practical explanation, claimed they were only asking because of scheduling, transportation, or something connected to the group. The excuse arrived too late. You had already heard the difference. The Page of Wands can reflect emotional exposure that is not yet mature enough to become a full confession. This person may not have been ready to say they wanted you, but they had revealed that someone else's access to you affected them. That was the rupture. Perhaps you answered simply. Maybe you said the two of you had spoken outside of work. Maybe you explained there was nothing serious, or perhaps you asked why they wanted to know. That question would have unsettled them. Because now attention had turned toward their motive, they might have laughed, changed the subject, or become suddenly interested in whatever was in front of them. Yet embarrassment would not erase what had already become clear. They had been watching closely enough to form a concern, closely enough to notice frequency, closely enough to remember details they had no professional reason to track. Jealousy had entered the conversation, not as ownership, as exposure. And beneath the jealousy was desire. Beneath the desire was fear. fear that they had waited too long, fear that you had already begun opening a door they never found the courage to approach. Still, beautiful soul, hidden intensity is not the same as honest connection. Feeling deeply does not automatically make someone ready to communicate respectfully. The question is no longer whether this person feels something. Their neutrality has already contradicted itself. The real question is whether they can move beyond watching, testing, and retreating and express what they feel without controlling your choices, punishing your freedom, or asking you to carry the emotional risk for them. The image here is the Five of Wands reversed. Psychologically, this card can describe conflict losing its power once someone refuses to become part of the competition. Tension may still exist, but it no longer determines the value of the connection, because you are not something to be won. The jealous person may have watched the other individual as though comparison could provide an answer. Who understood you better? Who reached you first? Who received more warmth? But attention is not a scoreboard, and closeness cannot be earned through silent competition while honest communication remains absent. The Five of Wands reversed asks what happens when the struggle is removed, when there is no rival to blame, no professional label to hide behind, no shared task creating automatic access. What remains between you then? Jealousy may confirm that this person became emotionally attached. Their reaction revealed that your attention mattered more than they admitted. Perhaps there is satisfaction in recognizing that their distance was not indifference, that their careful observation carried feeling beneath it. But feeling is only the beginning. It does not prove readiness. It does not guarantee compatibility. It does not replace courage, consistency, or respect. Someone may watch you closely and still avoid knowing you honestly. They may become threatened by another person while offering you no clear reason to choose them. They may desire closeness while remaining unwilling to create emotional safety. That distinction protects you. Because visible initiative matters. Honest questions matter. Behavior that remains steady after the jealous moment passes matters. Perhaps the other person was more direct. Perhaps the jealous person now becomes willing to speak. Neither possibility removes your right to decide what feels healthy. You are not responsible for rewarding whoever feels the most intensely. You are allowed to notice who communicates clearly, who respects your boundaries, who can hear an answer without becoming cold, controlling, or punishing. The professional mask has already slipped. The labels no longer explain everything. Access revealed attention. Proximity allowed desire to grow. Jealousy exposed what silence had protected, but exposure is not resolution. Beautiful soul, you are not the prize inside someone else's private contest. You are the person choosing what kind of connection receives continued access to you. Jealousy may have revealed what this person tried to hide. Only their next consistent actions will reveal whether those feelings can become something honest, respectful, and real.